Let's grab your seats. We have a very, very exciting pre-meeting with a number of people that I'm sure you're going to want to hear. One of which is a congressman that'll be coming on at the very end. That is probably going to be the next head of the NRCC and a member of leadership. And you will have seen him here tonight. Our first speaker tonight in our pre-meeting is the former president of the Manhattan Institute. He served as a fellow of the Harvard Institute of Politics, and from 2010 to 2014, he was director of policy of American Principles Project. He's the Republican nominee for Senate in New Jersey, which is a task that is extraordinarily difficult. Interestingly, he's been the Republican nominee for Senate in New Jersey before, in 1978. In that race, he faced Bill Bradley, but this time he's going to face off against Cory Booker in the general election. Let's bring up with a big round of applause, Jeff Bell.
Thank you, Mallory, and thank you for having me. It has been quite a journey because I left the state for a brief respite of 30 years. I was in Washington, and the reason I decided to plunge into a race for which, let's just say, the waves did not part when I eventually came back and said, I'm back, is that I'm totally frustrated with Washington. I worked in Washington for the last 4 years, as Mallory mentioned, as policy director of the American Principles Project, and I tried to get people interested in what the Federal Reserve is doing to the U.S. economy with the zero interest rate policy that they have had in place since December of 2008. Even before Obama took office, they have had this policy. What has it done? It was meant to stimulate business lending, to enable people to get loans at cheaper rates and stimulate the economy. We now have the worst, the most job-free recovery in American history. We have the American people unable to get any interest rates on their savings account or on their CDs, so it's almost impossible for the average person to save. We have a situation in which small business has seen the people who usually lend to small business, namely community banks, on the sidelines. And everyone in this room knows that small business creates the vast majority of jobs. So it isn't any wonder that we've had a jobless recovery. And I am a radical. I believe that we need to go to a gold-backed dollar. And that is the only way to get us out of the bind that the Fed has put us in. Why won't they get out of the bind? Well, Rich Danker, who was my campaign manager and worked with me for 4 years at American Principles, we found a number of reasons. One is that the Federal Reserve and Congress are codependents. Congress knows, including plenty of conservative members of Congress, that the Fed makes their life less politically stressful by financing these huge deficits, increased debt, at very low interest rates. So on a day-to-day basis, there are no bond vigilantes. The Congress feels very little real political pressure to reduce the deficit. The other thing that is true, and the other codependent, and I'm sorry if I'm offending some of the people in this room, is Wall Street. Wall Street is thriving on the zero interest rate policy because they are the ones, big banks, big investment firms, that can afford to borrow money. They have the credit worthiness. So loans under the zero interest rate policy are going to people who don't really need loans. And as a result, they're bidding up a lot of new financial bubbles, some of which undoubtedly will explode, just as it did in 2007, 2008 with residential real estate. So why don't we get out of the bind by raising interest rates, letting the market start to determine interest rates so people can save and small business can expand and hire people again? The reason it's not happening, and the reason why a more fundamental solution is needed, is that They know that there's a danger of a financial collapse if interest rates go up suddenly. So Washington is in gridlock, they are paralyzed, and with the limited means I had in the primary against candidates who, to be honest, have lived in the state in recent years, unlike me, the reason I decided to hit this issue is that I think it's the most important issue economically, and one that we discovered was not going to be addressed by incumbent congressmen, incumbent senators, or even federal candidates, and we have worked with a lot of them to try to get them interested. The Fed to them is an 800-pound gorilla. The Fed itself and Congress and the President are all paralyzed. They're not going to make any incremental policy changes, so the wheels have fallen off the system, and it's time for a big change, namely the return to a gold-backed dollar. That has been the essence of my campaign. And I am making a bet that many are skeptical of, which is that ordinary voters will put this issue into play. 36 years ago, as Mallory mentioned, I was the nominee for this same seat. I had defeated an incumbent senator, Clifford Case, in the primary, running on the Kemp-Roth tax cut, which I didn't think had gotten enough traction in the general political community. And it worked. The voters of New Jersey were interested, and even though I lost to Bradley in the general, he came out for a tax cut after opposing one in the primary, and I wound up working closely with Bill on the Tax Reform Act of 1986. So I know that ordinary voters will come through at a time when financial and political elites were not. That is the premise of my campaign, and after winning the primary on June 3rd, I have another 4.5 months to see if it works. Thank you.
Thank you. One of our favorite people is John Fund, and we just love John so much. But with such a packed schedule, we weren't able to get him up to speak. But he has a fabulous new book out that you may have seen in all sorts of shows. It's called Obama's Enforcer, Eric Holder's Justice Department. And John Fund will be out there signing books for you right after this meeting. So I urge you to get this book. It's fabulous, and I'll bring it up again. Our next speaker has led grassroots campaigns for the purpose of increasing transparency at the local government level. He's the founder of OpenTheBooks.com. It's a watchdog organization that strives for transparency of government spending. Tonight he's going to explain the coddled culture of the VA system. Come on up, Adam Andrzejewski.
Good job. Outstanding. Well, not only does Mallory have the toughest job to get us all in the room here together tonight, but he has to pronounce my last name. He deserves a big round of applause. Yes. Thank you, Mallory. Great job. I'm from Illinois. And in Illinois, if anything happens for the good of the people, it's entirely by accident. Our #1 manufactured product is corruption. And our favorite son sits in the White House, and he actually made promises to each one of us. He said that he was going to be the most transparent president ever. And so let's just do a brief review of the transparency headlines over the last couple of months. The NSA, they're collecting your metadata communication footprint. The IRS, they're mashing up with your health data and your medical records, your tax data. The CFPB, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and they are collecting all the credit and financial transactions in the country. So when Barack Obama said that he was going to be the most transparent president ever, he had you in mind. He's opening us up in the private sector. Well, at OpenTheBooks.com, we fight government to open their books and hold them accountable for the tax and spend decisions. And this has a constitutional premise. It's Article 1, Section 9 of the United States Constitution. And it says that a periodic reporting of revenues and expenses must be given to the people on a timely basis. Well, this is the internet age, the electronic age. And we simply feel that Article 1, Section 9 should be every dime online in real time. Open the books. And that's our mission at openthebooks.com, is to take every dime taxed and spent across the entire country, not only the federal level, but also the state level and the local level, and put it online so you can see it, so we can see all the gory details. Now, this is very important because what we've done is add 1.1 billion lines of government spending over the last 3 years. We're the world's largest repository of government spending. And at the federal level, we have nearly every dime that's been taxed and spent since the year 2000 with the checkbook. And we're holding 2.5 million federal salaries with 7-year salary and bonus histories. So when the national VA scandal hit, we were ready. When the doctor who retired because of the corrupt culture at the Phoenix VA blew the whistle and CNN broke the story, that scandal germinated, and just 30 days ago, the VA Secretary Shinseki went up in front of Congress. And when he went up in front of Congress on May 15th, we had the lead story at foxnews.com giving exposure to the salaries and the bonuses at the Phoenix VA. And this is what we found. 3,170 employees worked at the Phoenix VA, but only 226 doctors. The guys couldn't get in, 1,700 veterans couldn't get in for 6 months to see a doctor because there weren't enough of them. We found, I wanted to know how many quality assurance officers were in the Phoenix VA. Out of 3,000 employees, there was one. That's the job that would have held the VA accountable. That's the job that would have ensured that veterans received the health care that they deserved. At the Phoenix VA, we took a look at all the salaries and we quantified how much money was spent on direct medical care versus how much was spent on the bureaucracy. And 41% of the salaries were spent on direct medical care and 59% were spent on management, operations, and administration. Then U.S. Senator Tom Coburn saw that and he said, we don't need more gardeners, public affairs officers, interior decorators, and designers. We need more doctors and nurses. We asked the question, and it's a fair question, is the Phoenix VA an employment farm or is it a medical system? And then if you remember, the story spread to the 7 troubled VA centers because now whistleblowers were empowered to come out with the stories. And in these 7 centers where there was the greatest incidence of death and obviously the secret waitlist scandals, we found in our data at Open the Books $10 million over the last 3 years paid out in bonuses. And so then I wanted to know, who's looking after our veterans? They fought for us. We need to fight for them. So, of course, I thought that the public auditors would be looking out for the veterans. And the third-party auditor at the VA is Grant Thornton. And data at openthebooks.com shows $103 million paid to those auditors since the year 2008. So every story can be a bit more robust with hard data, and that's the story of openthebooks.com. Thanks, Mallory.
Thank you. I'm gonna quit while I'm ahead and not try to pronounce your last name again.
Sounds good.
NGFC.
Thank you. Yeah, no, that's great.
Thank you so much. Great organization. He'll be around, as will most of the other pre-meeting speakers, to talk to you all. I don't know if you all realize how important the Supreme Court is and their decisions in your lives. They affect your lives dramatically and continue to affect it even more so than you realize. Our next speaker is the Senior Fellow in Constitutional Studies at the Cato Institute, and he's also the Editor-in-Chief of the Cato Supreme Court Review. He looks at and works very hard to understand the importance of Supreme Court cases to our lives. Come on up, Ilya Shapiro.
Well, thanks very much for having me here, Mallory, and thanks all of you for coming. I've spoken at the Charleston meeting a few times. It's nice to be called up to the majors every once in a while, so that's very nice. I understand there's a whiskey tasting going on now. I encourage you all to head out there, even though I'm only speaking for 7 minutes. I find that the more my audience has had to drink, the wittier I am. So, some of you have commented on my soccer tie. And indeed, we have the World Cup going on. The U.S. team is playing their first game in about 15 minutes. Mallory, I apologize. I might be ducking out to go to that game. But anyhow, I'm actually becoming a citizen this coming Friday, and one of the, like most immigrants, I do a job that Americans won't, defending the Constitution. But people have told me that, with my sports and soccer obsession and whatnot, once I become a citizen, instantly I will stop caring about the World Cup. So we'll see what happens after this Friday. Before I just tell you a few things about the Supreme Court, I wanted to give a quick shout out to my very good friend Adam Quasman, who's a state rep in Arizona, running for Congress. We've just lost Eric Cantor. Adam will be the new Jewish Republican in Congress, a conservative one. And a former Cato intern and a George Mason economics graduate, I might add. So for those of you who know what that means. So anyway, the Supreme Court. I spent a lot of my time, this administration has been good to me, I spent a lot of my time talking about President Obama's constitutional violations. Obama versus the Constitution. In less friendly audiences, I start off by asking, who's for Obama and who's for the Constitution. Here I won't take that poll. But one of the things that often gets overlooked is the performance of the Obama administration at the Supreme Court, in the courts in general, the types of arguments that their lawyers are making. Now, I am not belittling the abilities and acumen and lawyerly skills of the lawyers who work in the Solicitor General's office or the Justice Department or anything like that. I'm sure they got better grades than I did in law school and clerked for the Supreme Court and all the rest of it. But as one commentator put it at the end of last Supreme Court term, when you have a crazy client who asks you to make crazy arguments, you're going to lose some cases. And indeed, last term, the Obama administration, the Solicitor General's office, won fewer than 40% of its cases. That is against a historical norm of 70% for the administration, for the president, in front of the Supreme Court. But you could say, okay, well, there's 5 Republican nominees and 4 Democrats on the court. You're going to lose a lot of those cases. Justice Kennedy is a swing vote. You don't know where he's going to come, but he's generally more with the conservatives than the liberals. Fine. Let's look at the unanimous cases, where Obama cannot get the votes of either Justice Kagan or Justice Sotomayor, his own nominees. This president's legal arguments have been rejected unanimously by the Supreme Court at a rate twice that of President Clinton and 3 times that of President George W. Bush. Just in the last 2 terms, they have lost unanimously 10 or 11 times, depending on how you count, in cases ranging from property rights, religious liberty, tax law, securities regulation, immigration. You name it, they've lost it. They've pushed through. They've broken through the envelope, asserting ridiculous federal powers. And the Supreme Court has not given them a single vote for that. This term is a little less of a blockbuster term than in previous years, where we've had Obamacare and immigration and gay marriage and all these other things. But nevertheless, I am confident in going out on a limb, and luckily I don't get paid for my Supreme Court predictions, but they're going to lose near unanimously in the recess appointments case. Could be coming as soon as this Thursday. They're going to lose in the Hobby Lobby, the contraceptive mandate case. And I say this, I have no problem with contraceptives, I have a problem with mandates, but that's the way the argument went. And perhaps most importantly, a case that most of you probably not heard of. It's a labor law case, Harris versus Quinn, about the forced unionization of independent home health care workers. Illinois passed a law, about a dozen states have this, forcibly unionizing and requiring them to pay union dues just because they get reimbursed from state Medicaid funds. And this is people including parents of disabled kids and things like that. Justice Scalia is a swing vote. I can't predict that. It'll be a 5-4. But if the good guys win, this will be the most significant case of the term. Thank you.
Ilya Shapiro, Cato. Our next speaker is an old friend. He previously served as chairman of the Republican National Committee and the governor and attorney general of Virginia. Most recently, he has served and continues to serve as president of the Free Congress Foundation. It's an organization with a long history which has focused recently on solutions to the government spending crisis and also on generating economic opportunity for future generations of America. It gives me pleasure to introduce my old friend, Governor Jim Gilmore. Come on up.
Mallory, thank you very much, Governor. Great to see you as always, and all the good friends who are here. The last time I spoke before this group, I hobbled up onto the stage on crutches. Some of you may remember that. Well, I ain't on crutches now. I'm back in the running again, so I'm delighted to see all of you. I actually come from the 7th District of Virginia. My hometown is Richmond, Virginia. Eric Cantor is my congressman. So I have quite an interesting take on this. I don't think it's greatly different. I believe that the people who represent the Tea Party are a voice for a growing sense of discontent and concern, not only in the conservative movement, but also in the Republican Party, and indeed in the community generally across the country. I think there are people who feel I think there are a broad-ranging group of people in the United States who are unhappy with the direction that the President is taking this country. They're unhappy with the economic policies that are being offered, with the control and more of the economy, the result being a weak nation, which results in a weak foreign policy. The people of the United States are unhappy about this. They are looking for a true opposition party that will offer true opposition to these policies. They don't feel they're getting it, and therefore they're making changes in the primaries across the United States today, as indeed they should. Now, Eric Cantor is an old friend of mine, a lifelong friend. His mother was my campaign treasurer when I ran for governor. So I don't have any brief against Eric Cantor personally. But the fact is that you just simply cannot focus on trying to become the speaker when the people of the 7th District were looking for somebody that was really going to be looking after their interests. And in my view, that is really part of the problem there. So a fellow named David Brat came along, put himself out there. He is not a liberal college professor. He teaches at the same school where my wife teaches, as a matter of fact. And the fact is that once it was this theme was being put out that he was some kind of liberal college professor, that was just simply not true. It became well known across the district that it was not true. So every time Eric said those things, it actually drove the turnout for David Brat. But this is hardly the point. The point is this. This country needs a new policy. And I will say to you that the Republican leadership and the Republican Party needs a new policy. We have to, as I said here last time I was here, we have to make it clear that we as conservatives care about regular people in this country and the concerns that they have. Now, and what are their concerns? They're concerned because their young people, their children are coming out of college with bachelor's degrees and they can't get a job. How many of you know, friends, or yourself even, people come out of college and they don't really have a chance to start their careers. They're excited about the future and they don't have a chance to get into something that's really good to get started because we have such an economy right now that is not robust, it is not exciting. African Americans are unemployed at a higher rate than the national average. Women are unemployed at a higher rate than the national average. Hispanics are unemployed in the same way, and the career opportunities are not there. Only we conservatives and we Republicans have a chance to really put those ideas forward in any meaningful way. And that, I would suggest to you, has to become the national mission, both of our conservative movement and the party that we're in. It has to be the national movement to stand up for regular people out there, particularly working people, who are trying to advance their careers and advance their opportunities and move up into the middle class and beyond, even higher, upward mobility. That is the secret foundation of the United States of America. And that is what we must be again. That we can have all the ideas and programs that we want. We can have our special interest ideas. That's okay. But at the end of the day, we must explain to people that we care about the. How many people here remember when I ran for governor and I ran on the notion of cutting the car tax? Sure, even Haley remembers that. Why did that matter? It really wasn't all that much money. It was the fact that what we did was we converted the conservative movement of the Republican Party into a program that cared about people. They cared about putting money back into the pockets of people so they could do something with their own lives. Is this not the standard conservative thinking that we've been doing since Ronald Reagan? I believe it is. That's the kind of policy we need. That's the kind of approach we need. The result will be a stronger foreign policy, and that is the direction that I advocate for our movement and for the Republican Party. Thank you very much.
Governor Jim Gilmore, thanks so much for being here with us.
Thank you very much.
I'm going to ask the panelists to take their place because we're going to go right into the main meeting. Mr. Toronto and Mary and Jim Rutenberg, whoever you are. So if you can all get up. Our next speaker is really a new friend, and I hope he'll be a friend. He's been a professional baseball player. He's owned a family car business, and he served as Texas Secretary of State. He represents the 25th District of Texas. Come on up, Congressman Roger Williams.
Thank you very much, and I want to say hello to all my friends on the front row, and thank you for having me here. I am Roger Williams. I represent the Congressional District 25. I'm a business guy. I ran for office because I didn't think anybody, Haley, was fighting for small business. I ran on a pretty simple platform: lower taxes, less government, cut the spending, defend the borders, listen to your generals, understand the 10th Amendment, and always stand with Israel. And that's where we've been. But I want to tell you, I take exception to this administration that says the economy's back, that Main Street's back. I still own a business, own car dealerships. 75 years my family's been in business. I take exception with an administration that tells us Main Street is back when you've got 47 million people on food stamps, when you've got 48 million people between the ages of 18 and 64 haven't even worked one day the last 12 months, when you've got 75% of the people tell you today they're living paycheck to paycheck, when you got $2.5 billion going to free cell phones, and you got 50% of the kids graduating from college either underemployed or can't get a job in the next 12 months. That is not an economy. We're going to be talking about fixing the economy. I know how to do it. You know how to do it. We're going to be talking about a program we're going to be ramping out here the next couple of weeks called Jumpstart America. I want you all to be looking for it. It's going to be pretty simple. It's going to empower individuals, not the federal government, to get us out of this mess. It's going to be based on cash flow, not based on taking loopholes away. If we're not going to cut expenses in America, we need to create more cash flow in America. The only people who can do that are all of us as business owners. So we're going to propose a 30% flat tax on businesses. We're going to propose two taxes on individuals, 20% on the first million, 30% on the next million. We're going to cut the capital gains tax, bring it back down from 18 to 15. Should be 0, but 15 we know works. We're going to bring the dividends back down from 18 to 15. We're going to do away with the inheritance tax, most unfair tax there is anywhere in the world. We're going to add 1.5 million jobs by doing that in America. We're also going to repatriate all the money that's overseas we hear about at 5% and do it annually. Do it every year. Repatriate that money and possibly put that money in our highway trust fund to help fund the highways. But do it every single year. We're going to allow 100% depreciation on fixed assets. When you buy a copy machine, you buy a printing press, you buy a van, you buy a desk, you write it off 100% that you buy it. Now that will jumpstart America. That will allow all of us to begin to get off the defensive mode and get off and get on offense and get people off unemployment. If we can get unemployment down to a real 5%, we can repatriate that $2 or $3 trillion that's overseas. We can allow us, small business people like me, to hire people, take risks, and get rewarded. We will bring America back where it needs to be. I will tell you this, that's the answer. And I'm going to fight every day, but all of you understand, too, this is the most important election of our lifetime. We cannot make a mistake on this one. 2014, frankly, is more important than 2016. That's why we got to tell everybody that we got to understand we got groups against individuals, we got socialism versus capitalism, and we got dependency versus it being independent. And that's what we're all fighting for. So I would ask all of you to keep doing what you're doing. Get off the porch, lead the parade down Main Street. Don't just watch it go down Main Street. And remember this, the words well said are not as strong as the words well done. And we must remember that. And just remember this, that Bob Gates told me one day, sometimes you have to plant a tree you never stand under. We need to do that. We need to remember President Bush when he said, when he came 9/11, he said, we will not falter, we will not fail. We have been tested, we will pass this test. And we must remember that there's a lot of opportunity out there for us. But it starts with the private sector, not the government. Let's get the government, let's create tax reform, get the government out of health care, energize the energy business, strengthen the military. Let's get our kids quit from dropping out and talk about community colleges, and let's balance the budget and create net worth in America. That's the formula. That's what I'm fighting for every single day. Those are Texas values. Those are Americans' values. The last thing we got left to get our country back is all of us as individuals, not the government. Less government, not more government's the answer. I want to thank you for having me here. May God bless all of you, and may God bless the United States of America. Thank you.
Okay. I need Jim Rutenberg up here, ASAP, wherever you are. Get up here right away. We're going to be starting the main meeting in about 30 seconds.
You ready?
Okay. Let's get our seats taken right away. I want to welcome you to the New York meeting. This will be the last meeting before our summer break. We'll be back in September. My name's Mallory Factor, and I will be taking you through this meeting with one of the greatest group of people we have ever assembled. And part of that great group are to my left, to your right, and that's James Toronto, a regular here. He's a member of the Wall Street Journal's editorial board and author of Best of the Web. Next to him is the lovely, talented Mary Kissel, a member of the Wall Street Journal's editorial board and the host of Opinion Journal on WSJ Live. And from that unbelievably conservative newspaper, that one that is the newspaper that we all look to get our conservative values from, Jim Rutenberg. He's the New York Times Magazine chief political correspondent. Jim Rutenberg. Our first speaker is a force of nature. He's the editor of the Weekly Standard, which together with Fred Barnes and John Podhoretz, he founded in 1995. Previously, he served as Chief of Staff to Vice President Quayle, and during the George H.W. Bush administration, during the George H.W. Bush administration, and to Secretary of Education William Bennett under President Reagan. Tonight, he'll share with us his thoughts on whether the GOP is truly prepared to govern in 2014 and 2015. Come on up, William Crystal.
Thanks, Mallory. It's good to be back in New York. I grew up just a couple of miles from here on the Upper West Side, and that's why I'm a conservative. Bella Abzug was my congresswoman. John Lindsay was my mayor. And it took nothing more to become a strong conservative. You know, people like to pretend they have the political views they do because they read certain books or took certain courses in college or learned economics or political philosophy, but often it's just revulsion against the people you grew up next to. So revulsion's too strong. I love New York, but watching New York liberalism in the 60s, I think, did have a deep effect on me. And I think we're seeing something similar today, actually, with American liberalism in this current moment. Let me give you my quick take on the elections. I think that's what I told Mallory I would talk about, whether Republicans are ready to govern or not. They're not quite ready to govern, but they don't have to govern still for a little while. They're pretty good shape. Compared to a year and a half ago, I'd say they're in surprisingly good shape. I think there are a lot of interesting ideas. Politicians are adopting some of those interesting ideas. Republicans will win the Senate, I think, this November, and we'll have a chance with the Republican Congress to advance some legislation to not just repeal but replace Obamacare, to not just denounce but fix things like Dodd-Frank, to be serious about pro-middle class, pro-Main Street, conservative policies. I think that's the key task of the next Republican Congress. Most of it won't become law. It can lay the groundwork for 2016. We shouldn't get our hopes up. Even if Republicans win a big majority in the Senate, which is possible, they could go to 53, 54, 55 senators. Still, the president's the president. He'll have the veto. There'll be a limit to what can happen. But it can be awfully important, this election in 2014. Jeff Bell was up here a few minutes ago. His victory in the primary in '78, even though he lost the general election to Bill Bradley, running on supply-side economics, changed the character of the economic debate within the Republican Party. He then worked for Ronald Reagan, laid the groundwork for Reagan's adoption of supply-side economics in 1980, helped Reagan win a huge victory after the Republican Party seemed, just 6 years before, think about that, in 1974, totally down and out. Reagan won a huge victory and really changed the course of the country. So I think you could have something like that over the next 3 years. It requires a victory in 2016. I mean, this is the most important presidential election, certainly since 1980, maybe even before. The Supreme Court is at stake. Ilya mentioned that. I mean, it's 5-4 decisions everywhere. The next president will shape the Supreme Court. The next president will decide whether we keep Obamacare or repeal and replace it. The next president will have a huge amount to say about the size and scope of the federal government. And above all, for me now, in this, as we see the headlines, the next president can either strengthen America's role in the world or continue down what I think is, unfortunately, a very dangerous path. So 2016 is huge. 2014 is big as a prelude to 2016. Final point, the very good news about 2014, I think, is the strength of the Republican candidates across the country for both the House and the Senate. Interesting candidates, unusual candidates, a lot of non-career politicians, a lot of young candidates. If you have a Republican Senate next year with Ben Sasse from Nebraska, either person who's running, Shannon or Langford from Oklahoma, Tom Cotton from Arkansas, Joni Ernst from Iowa, I could go on and on. If you have a Congress with Elise Stefanik from upstate New York, who I think will win her primary in a week, a very intelligent, principled, 30-year-old conservative woman. I just met a woman who's running in New Hampshire, too, Maryland Garcia, who I think has a very good chance to be the next congresswoman from there. She's 31 years old. It is not the Republican Party that it was 3 or 4 or 5 years ago. It's a young, reformist, aggressive Republican Party. I think the quality of the House and Senate conferences could be improved next year, with all due respect to the current members. There's some very good, it's always a mistake to say something like that, but supplementing the excellent efforts of the current members. Quality of the Republican governors, with all due respect to some very fine recent governors like Haley, is very high, and also young, interesting people, whether it's Scott Walker, Mike Pence, Chris Christie. You can really go around Bobby Jindal. I mean, it is pretty remarkable. I mean, obviously, I'm partisan. I'm a conservative. I worked in Republican administrations. But I think objectively, if you had looked at the Republican Party and the disarray it was in November 7th, 2012, after the Romney defeat and the failure to win the Senate, and look at the quality of people likely to be in office in 2015, the quality of the Republican presidential field, honestly, compared to 2012, the reformist ideas that are out there, I think it's a pretty good moment, actually, for Republicans, and a pretty good moment for conservatives in America. And America needs a vigorous and healthy and forward-looking conservatism now more than it has for a long time.
Okay, let's take some questions from the panel. First of all, James Toronto, best of the web.
Bill, you said, does the microphone working? It will in about 2 seconds.
Turn it on, Bob.
It is now. That's better. Now I can be heard. Bill, you said the most important issue to you is America is having a stronger role in the world. And I want to ask you a question related to that. If you could go back in time 12 years, what advice would you give your younger self about how to approach the Iraq question?
I mean, I've obviously thought a lot about that. I think it was the right decision to go into Iraq. I still think Saddam Hussein, left in power in the Middle East that existed then, with the sanctions coming off, would have created an even more dangerous situation. I think getting out totally in 2011 was a huge mistake, but I just wrote a piece today with Fred Kagan saying, in a way, let's put aside litigating this fight about whether it was wrong to go in or wrong to get out. We are now facing a real potential catastrophe in the Middle East, and it would be good to see some leadership. And I think Republicans would support the president, incidentally, as we tried to do in Syria until he backed off, as I certainly did in Libya. If he tried to show some strength and tried to not allow the situation in the Middle East to spiral out of control.
Please do. Mary Kissel.
Bill, great. Love the bullish case, but weren't you bullish on Mitt and bullish on Palin?
No, no. I was hopeful for Palin, but I always thought Mitt was a tough sell, and I thought we were finished in 2008 after September 15th.
Here's the question. So the Republican Party doesn't have a clear, unified message either on immigration or on foreign policy. So how can you make the bullish case? Can you go to the midterms without a positive case to be elected?
Yeah, well, individual candidates will go to their citizens in their states and districts and make their cases, and we can debate something like immigration. I think we'll probably have different views on that. But no, you don't need to unify. I prefer to have a diversity of views and real vigor and energy and fresh views rather than Mitt Romney. That was a wonderfully unified campaign. There were no dissension within the campaign. He locked up the nomination against a not very serious field, and everything was just kind of conventional, the most agreed upon Republican orthodoxies. How did that work? I'd much prefer, look at the years from 77 to 80. Look at the debates. It was really unbelievable, even in retrospect. Supply-side economics against old-fashioned Republican economics. Pro-life versus pro-choice. Reagan, who had run against the previous Republican president 4 years before and run against détente and against Henry Kissinger, the most famous Republican, Secretary of State since Dulles, I suppose. I mean, vigorous debate is good. There'll be a nominee. He'll have to resolve this in 2016.
Jim.
Bill, so to pick up on the foreign policy question, good to see you, by the way.
Jim.
So I'm going to quote Rand Paul on the current situation in Iraq. He said, "I hate that Mosul is falling, but I also think that for 10 years we have supplied the Iraqis and they can't stand up and do anything to defend their country. And is it all up to us? You know where it goes from there." Could that ever be a majority view, or at least in a primary, a winning view in 2016 for the Republicans?
I mean, I think it's, I understand the sentiment. I think it would be a mistake to let that govern our policies because it's not really a question of our moral approbation or not of Iraqi soldiers. It's a question of American national interests, I think, which are now overwhelmingly against allowing an al-Qaeda-related group, really an al-Qaeda group, to control the huge swath of Iraq and Syria on the one hand, and Iran to control the rest of Iraq on the other. It's an absolute nightmare. I don't think Rand Paul is going to be the nominee, and I don't think his foreign policy views will prevail. But look, he's entitled to make the case. I think it will actually be healthier if he makes the case. I think it has been healthy for him to make the case over the last year. From my point of view, from the other side of the party, I would say the big story, slightly underreported, if I might say, by the press, which loves Rand Paul because it's, such a dissension among Republicans type story. What are the Republican candidates running on this year? The major Senate and House candidates. Very few are running as real Rand Paul. Let's worry about drone strikes here at the what hotel are we in? Whatever hotel we're in. Even the NSA, which is the one issue I think he's got some resonance on, has faded a little. The Republican critique of President Obama, is pretty hawkish. And if you look at Ben Sasse or Tom Cotton or Joni Ernst or Tom Tillis or just candidates across the spectrum, they're going to be, I think the Republican Party is settling into not quite where I am. It's not going to sound quite like Bush and McCain, but a pretty tough-minded, hawkish understanding that American strength is essential to have a reasonably secure and peaceful world.
James Toronto.
I guess I want to challenge your characterization and your answer to Mary of the 2012 presidential campaign as being, what did you say, devoid of debate and very conventional. It seems to me there was an awful lot of debate in the primaries. You had Santorum, you had Gingrich, you had Ron Paul, all with rather divergent points of view. And then Romney put Paul Ryan on the ticket, one of the leading policy guys in the Republican Party. Am I wrong?
Well, no, there was debate in the campaign. I just think Romney's own agenda was limited. Look, he believed he could make it a referendum on Obama. It wasn't a crazy thought. The economy got better in 2012. Housing prices began to come back. The referendum theory of the race fell a little short. As a result, there was no Romney plan to replace Obamacare. You cannot really be for repealing something that's changed the entire healthcare system of the country without explaining what you would put in its place. Dodd-Frank, it was an absolutely conventional applause line, correctly. It's terrible, all those regulations. What was the Romney plan to replace Dodd-Frank? He thought he didn't need to do it. As I say, it wasn't a crazy calculation. I think it was not a sound one. And Paul Ryan on the ticket turned out to be, in a way, the exception that proves the rule. I give Mitt a lot of credit for putting Ryan on the ticket, and I think it did show that you can now be more serious about entitlements, that that's not the third rail of American politics. You can have the Ryan budget and not get clobbered on it, and I don't think that's why that didn't hurt them, didn't help them much, but it didn't hurt them. But despite the pick of Ryan, it didn't end up being a policy-heavy campaign. It's certainly not a really innovative campaign. So I think the quality of the debate now in Congress is pretty high. I think the quality of the debate in the next 2 years, I hope, will be pretty high. And I think, to be fair to Newt Gingrich and Herman Cain and Michelle Bachmann and all those candidates, I think the quality of if we have a Republican stage, the first debate in 2015, 2016, with, let's just take the most obvious candidates. I mean, Chris Christie, Scott Walker, Mike Pence, Bobby Jindal, Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz, and Rand Paul. That is an impressive group. I mean, I think that's not, I think voters will look at that and think, gee, a lot of them are awfully young, they're pretty diverse and come from different backgrounds. A lot of them have real accomplishments. Some of them are younger and newer, and like Barack Obama, don't have that much in the way of accomplishments. Sometimes that doesn't hurt so much in a presidential campaign if you have a vision. I look forward to those debates.
Mary.
Bill, will anyone be paying attention in, for example, the Hispanic community if the Republican Party doesn't press for reform? Doesn't that give the president an opening to just do an amnesty and then paint Republicans as hysterical when he does it? How do you win without immigration reform?
Well, look, it's pretty obvious you can win without immigration reform. I do think it's probably, unfortunately, some of the rhetoric 5, 6, 7 years ago was alienating to Latinos, and I think I'll be surprised if the next Republican presidential candidate gets much more than Mitt Romney's 27% of the Latino vote, but it's perfectly obvious you can win with that vote. And incidentally, you wouldn't win if you got the Bush level. If Romney got the Bush 40% of the Latino vote, he doesn't win the election either. So there are plenty of votes in play. Most Latinos care a lot about other issues, not just immigration. And look, I think it's a serious policy issue. It is not clear-cut that the right policy is the Senate bill or even the House principles. Look what's happening in Arizona. They kept saying, oh, don't worry, that's such a stupid right-wing argument about how it would be a magnet for illegals if you give amnesty. That's just kind of really a pathetic argument. I myself argued against that 5, 6, 7 years ago. On immigration, I've been bugged by reality. I am more conservative on immigration than I was then, because I think I've looked at the policies, both the economic policies that Dave Bratz emphasized in Virginia, and the consequences in terms of what's happening in Arizona now and elsewhere. So I think you can make a case for a tougher immigration stance.
Let's take a question from the floor. Okay, I see a hand up here.
Thank you. Brian Reardon, Ramsey, New Jersey. My question is regarding the youth vote. Do you feel that with Republicans in, let's say, the state of Texas that have come out focusing on the gay marriage issue, do you feel that Republicans should eliminate the gay marriage issue on the platform to win over more youth votes?
I think people, on those kinds of issues, I think people should say what they believe, and they shouldn't try to eliminate one thing or push another thing to get youth votes. I don't think what Texas, I guess, put in its state, whatever it is, platform, if that's what it is, will be necessarily typical of what most Republican candidates will run on in 2014 or 2016, or I think it should be. But I don't think we should go around telling people, abandon this long-held view of yours because some poll, or even a series of polls, shows that the youth is that way, or even that the public is that way. You know, Ronald Reagan, if you polled Reagan's issues, he didn't win every poll. Carter and Kennedy were closer to the public on some issues. People do have a certain respect if you stand on principle and articulate that principle and make your case. On the youth vote, though, I do think that's a huge opportunity for Republicans. In 2016, Republicans are very likely to have the younger presidential candidate for a change. The younger candidates have done well since the end of the Cold War. And so it's not a matter of identity politics, obviously. That doesn't move everyone. But I think it would help at least allow the Republicans to make their case. And as I always say when I speak on college campuses, maybe young people will learn something from their slight mistakes in voting for President Obama in 2008 and 2012. It would be terrible to get older year after year and never learn anything, right? So I always tell young people, this is your chance, you know? You made a little mistake, a little error. You'll laugh about it 30 years from now. Can you believe I voted for Barack Obama once or even twice, after the country is in good shape again?
William Crystal, by the way, he said if all of you buy a subscription to the Weekly Standard, he'll come back each month.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you, Robert.
Our next speaker is an old friend. Well, not that old, but a friend. She's represented Tennessee's 7th Congressional District since 2002. She serves as vice chair of the powerful House Energy and Commerce Committee. And tonight, she's going to explain to us how Bergdahl is an excuse for clearing out Gitmo. Come on up, Congresswoman Marsha Blackburn.
Yes, wow, what a great room. I know. You all got out there and had some of that Tennessee sipping whiskey. I know exactly what you've been doing. Took a little nip before you came in here, but that suits me just fine. Just be sure you buy it. Send those dollars to Tennessee. We all love that. Well, we're going to talk a little bit about Bergdahl, but let me tell you something. Being out in my district last week and talking with my constituents, doing town hall meetings, I got to tell you something. When you talk about the issues for 2014 and 2016, the thing at the top of the list is this. People are sick and tired of being broke. They are absolutely so tired of being broke. One of my constituents said, Marsha, I got to tell you, I'm tired of having too much month left at the end of my money. And that's where a lot of people are right now. The Obama economy has not been kind to small business owners, and it hasn't been kind to innovators, and it hasn't been kind to a lot of our small business manufacturers and employers. As a matter of fact, I'm having trouble finding many people it has been kind to. But when you look at the issue of what is happening with the economy and with jobs, that is going to be at the top of the heap. And people want to know what you're going to do about this. How are you going to fix it? And as we are out doing Chamber of Commerce meetings and Rotary clubs and town halls, what we're hearing from people now is, tell me specifically what you're going to do. People want the specifics, and especially, and this ties back into something Bill was saying, those younger voters, those millennials, they want us to define for them what the course of action is going to be. And one of the things I think that will hurt us is if we don't take some actions, put some legislation on the floor, call the vote, and put the votes on the board. That is what people want to see us do. Now, some of those things they want us to take some actions on, and Betsy is the real pro on this. It is, what are you going to do to replace Obamacare? And employers large and small say you got to get rid of this, because when you look at the insurance track, you see rates going up across the country. When you look at the delivery of health care, the cost to hospitals, the reimbursement rates are down, they're coming in slower, and the cost is beginning to cramp the access to health care in our country, and we're seeing this repeatedly. Another thing they want to know is, what are we going to do to rein in this imperialist government where we have a president that thinks that he's king and he can just go out, circumvent Congress, and because he's got a pen and a phone, he can sign executive orders, and obviously when you look at the Taliban 5, he can call terrorist and do that rather than calling Congress. So they want us to rein him back in. Another thing they're wanting to see is to rein in the EPA. There's a piece of legislation Senator Burrs had in the Senate. I've got it in the House. It's called the CHOP Act. It forces the Department of Energy and the EPA to combine into one entity, and would not only save operational costs, but think about the amount of paperwork that it would save. And it's interesting to me, our constituents are beginning to realize these rules that are coming from the EPA are impacting their paycheck. Wage stagnation, can't add new manufacturing components or processes like anodizing aluminum, things of that nature, because of the EPA. And they're showing up and they're talking about it. As I said at the beginning, the people are ticked off. They are tired of being broke. They know it is immoral for them to struggle to live within their means, to pay their taxes to a federal government that refuses to live within its means, and they've had it. They've absolutely had it. Another thing we hear a lot about is internet freedom. And when we talk about the millennials and tech entrepreneurs, they can't believe that we're not taking actions in the House to keep the FCC from controlling the internet. They do not want the net neutrality rules implemented because it's going to hamper innovation, especially in the healthcare sector, where your mobile medical apps are what is going to energize home health care and allow individuals to take greater responsibility in their health care. The other thing, and this ties into Bergdahl, people are furious with the Taliban 5 release and the nation's security. And I have a bill, the PROTECT Act. Frank Wolf is joining me in this. And what we are doing is to make it a criminal offense to release any Gitmo detainee and put them on U.S. soil. The president has said he wants to close Gitmo. It was his first executive order. We are going to do our part to make certain that those detainees never come to U.S. soil. And with that, I yield the balance of my time.
There is no balance. Okay, first question. Jim.
Thank you for that. So you covered a lot of ground, but I have to...
Southern girls talk fast.
I'm from Philadelphia, so... anyway, I have to ask you, though, that we had a major upset.
Sure.
Eric Cantor loses in Virginia. For you...
Could you speak?
For you, what is the biggest lesson from Cantor's loss, and what will it mean in terms of Republican policy in the House of Representatives?
Absolutely. The biggest lesson is all politics is local, and you have to be able to define what you are for. And people want to know that. They want to see that you're fighting about these issues, that they're focused on. What it means to the House is you're probably going to see more of a diversity of legislation come to the floor. Bear in mind, when you look at the Deep South states, and that is a quarter of our conference, do you know how many chairmen we have out of that component? 2 gavels. A quarter of it. Some of us are very focused on this. This is why we're working for Steve Scalise to be the next majority whip. And the other thing is having more bills that are coming from the RSC, the conservative wing, and moving those to the floor. Those are the issues when you go across the heartland, things that I've articulated and talked about, whether it's my district or down in Louisiana for Cassidy last week or wherever. It's what you're hearing about.
James. Well, I'll ask a Bergdahl question since you didn't end up saying much about that after all. I agree with what I took to be your position, that for Obama this was a win-win, that he saw unloading these 5 Guantanamo detainees as a plus for this deal, not something we were giving up. And of course, what's interesting is he was presumably expecting to get some blowback on that, but not on the other side of it.
Correct.
And the fact that Bergdahl looks to have been possibly a deserter and certainly was left under questionable circumstances has caused quite a backlash. What's your sense of how this affects the politics of future Gitmo releases? Does this actually make it harder, or does it make it easier?
Okay, and that is the right question to be asking. Here's the facts on what happened with Bergdahl and why it is going to make it harder. The president asked DOJ for an opinion the 1st of May to see if he could circumvent us. Now, we specifically put in NDAA, the reauthorization, a couple of years ago, the provision that we have to have 30 days notice. And the president didn't want to do that because he had tried in December 2011 and January 2012 to turn these loose, these Taliban 5 loose. Clinton, Panetta said no. So he decided to go to DOJ. He spent a month seeing how he could work around us. He did it anyway, even though it was clearly breaking the law. There were 80 to 90, did you get that? 80 to 90 people between the White House and DOD that knew about this. But he couldn't bring himself to tell one member of Congress. So there is bipartisan outrage to this. Because of that bipartisan outrage, it is going to be more difficult for him to let anybody go from Guantanamo Bay. And even though his executive order that he signed January 22nd, 2009, to close Gitmo and made that his first action, I don't think he's going to be able to do it because people now realize the situation that has been caused by letting Bergdahl go, or bringing Bergdahl home and letting the Taliban 5 go.
Mary.
Congressman, thank you for your remarks. I just wanted to follow up on Jim's question about the aftermath of Cantor's loss. Do you think that this empowers the GOP to do things like deauthorize the Export-Import Bank to make a stand against crony capitalism? And would you vote for such a bill? I would vote to deauthorize or sunset, allow the sunset to transpire on the Ex-Im Bank. I think that it's time for it. So, and yes, they want us to define what we are for and then own it and go out and talk about it. You know, I am for the replacement and the repeal of Obamacare, and people want to know that, and they want to know I'm for a cross-state line purchase of health insurance. I'm for equal tax treatment. I am for tort reform. I'm not ashamed to go say it, and we ought to own it and go talk about it and sell it.
Jim, back to you.
So on to the EPA, which you did cover quite a bit. This is kind of a philosophical question, but as we come into 2 election cycles, where should the Republicans say the line should be between regulation that does stop bad actors and regulation that does not affect the economy? What are you willing to see an EPA do?
Well, what I want them to do first is cost-benefit analysis, and this is something that they do not do. And if cost-benefit analysis proves that something would be an improvement, then by all means, let's take a good look at that. But when you are necessarily skyrocketing rates, when you are disallowing clean coal technologies, when you only want to incent wind and solar and not look at hydroelectric and not allow nuclear and not put the carbon fuels incentives, have things in place that would allow improvement of those technologies, then you are not for all of the above. You're for pick and choose. And, you know, let's make it all of the above. And then let's do cost-benefit analysis. They do not do that, and they will come before us in hearing after hearing and say we do not do it because it does not get us a justification for the ends that we want.
James. On the replacement of Obamacare, what do you do to minimize the amount of, Obamacare has already caused an enormous amount of dislocation. What do you do to minimize the dislocation of replacing it with something else?
Absolutely. And there are plenty of experiments that are, I should say, opportunities for test cases. In Tennessee, when we had TennCare, I had one for health savings accounts in the Medicaid population. And those are type opportunities that we would have. I have to tell you, the out-of-pocket expenses that people are having to incur, they are very upset about this. The elevated cost of insurance, looking at having the subsidy, something that is a taxable action, we're hearing about that.
Let's take some questions from the floor. Never give you a mic.
How do you rein in Emperor Obama?
The way we rein him in is a very slow process, actually, and I know it's frustrating to you all because it is for us, but it's just the same as trying to get an indictment. You know, you do all of your work, and then you go to the grand jury, and then you take the time to prepare. We have to write our letters. We have to hold our hearings. One of the actions where we have been most successful is through the appropriations process with amendments to begin to restrict funds. And you'll continue to see us all summer long taking those requests to the floor. Yeah.
Next question. Anybody back here? Yes, sir.
Thank you. Alan West recently wrote an article about the Bergdahl situation, saying that President Obama should be impeached over it. But my take is the House won't do it because of the color of Barack Obama's skin. They don't have the courage to go ahead and impeach a black president.
Well, I think what you're going to see is there was a great article, a great opinion piece in the Wall Street Journal today about our standing to file suit on not only the overreach with Bergdahl, but with others. And what we're trying to do is be thoughtful about it and look at what is going to be the best way for us to rein him in. This is the process we've been going through, and I think the Rivkin option that was there in the paper today is worth consideration, and a lot of our members are being very thoughtful on that. Coming through Judiciary Committee, by the way.
We'll take one more brief question.
Thanks. Would I be way out of line in suggesting that we close Gitmo by first killing the prisoners?
I have to tell you, as someone who has been to Gitmo, and has watched some of the interrogations, I think that having those prisoners there has allowed us a tremendous amount of intelligence. And I've got a major military post in my district, Fort Campbell, the 101st, the 160th, the Special Ops guys. I like the fact that we've been able to hold them there and have been able to get intel that have helped to keep some of our guys safe. The war on terror is not coming to an end, and it is escalating, and we need to keep those guys there, and we need to keep interrogating them, and we need to stay on top of these networks so that it does not get away from us. What is happening in Iraq scares me to death, and it should scare every one of us.
Marsha Blackburn from Tennessee. However, Haley Barber said to make sure we tell you that we tell everybody that you're from Mississippi. Our next speaker is an unbelievably good author. As a matter of fact, he wrote an afterword to a book which became the #4 New York Times bestseller, Big Tent, which some of you may know who else was involved in the book. I strongly urge you to get it. He's really an American political legend. He's held some of the most powerful positions in American politics. In his early career, he was political director of the Reagan White House. He chaired the Republican National Committee from 1993 to 1997, during which time Republicans captured both the Senate and the House of Representatives for the first time since 1954. And he was elected governor of Mississippi in 2003, and then became chairman of the Republican Governors Association in 2009 during his second term. Tonight he will talk to us about why purity can be the enemy of victory. Governor Haley Barber, come on up.
Thank you. Thank you, Mallory. Marcia is from Laurel, Mississippi, but since she's been in Tennessee, she learned to talk faster than I do. And Mallory has given me this salt shaker up here, and I will try to say more than hello before it beeps, Betsy. You know, I want to talk to you about conservatism and the two-party system. I am a Republican because I'm a conservative. I became a Republican in 1968, the first time I ever saw a political poll. 6% of the people in Mississippi identified themselves as Republicans. 6. I worked in the Nixon campaign. We overperformed. We got 14% of the vote in Mississippi that year, 1968, to George Wallace's 65. But we do have a two-party system, and people can like it or not like it, but we've had it for going on 200 years. I'm one who believes it served us well. But in a two-party system, one thing you learn if you've been party chairman or chairman of the Republican Governors Association or political director of the White House, both parties necessarily are coalitions. Both parties are necessarily coalitions. And if you got to agree with Haley Barbour on everything to be a good Republican, we'd have a mighty small party. Okay? And so when Mitt Romney, and I'm like Bill, I didn't think they ran a very good campaign, but Mitt Romney got 60 million votes. And 60 million people are not going to agree on everything. In fact, my wife Marcia says she and I don't agree on everything. She says I got a right to be wrong sometime. But in our party, to get a majority, still be the conservative part of the United States, and the Democrats are the liberal part of the United States. But in our party, some people are not as conservative as I. Some are more conservative than I, not many. And then there are people who are moderately conservative. For us to win elections, we have to get a majority of the vote. Let's don't ever forget the purpose of a political party is to elect like-minded people to public office. It isn't to wave the flag. It isn't to shout the slogans. It's to win. Not for ego, not for fame and fortune. It's to win because if you don't win, you can't set public policy. And if you can't set public policy, then you can't do what it is that causes people like you to come out on a Monday night for a meeting like this and listen to guys with funny accents like mine. Our goal is to win so we can, in this case, change abominable public policy that not only is wrong-headed, but has had terrible results in almost every area. The economy, environment. You know, there was a day when we actually had energy policy in America. It was more abundant, affordable American energy. Now, environmental policy obliterates energy policy. This is the first administration in American history that literally has as its policy to drive up the cost of energy so Americans use less of it. That's their policy, and they're not too bashful about saying it, just to be honest. But policy after policy, if we want to change things, then we have to win the elections that allow us to govern. I'm like Bill. I think 2014 promises to be a very good year for us. A very good year because Obama's policies stink and people know it. And people realize for most middle-class, working-class American families, the Obama recovery has been worse than the recession. And I mean that literally. Per household median income in America has dropped more during the recovery than it dropped during the recession. Only 48% of adult Americans today have a full-time job. That's the lowest since back in the 70s when women were first coming into the workforce in large numbers. Of people who are employed, about 20% have a part-time job. And one reason is Obama's policies push you toward that. Look at Obamacare. Look at other policies. Our goal's got to be to win. And if we make purity the standard by which we judge candidates, we won't win. Because in politics, purity is the enemy of victory. Now, I'm a good Presbyterian boy, but regardless of your religion or lack thereof, I can tell you one thing. Only one perfect person ever walked on this earth, and he ain't going to run this year in any state in America, okay? So, Marcia made a point and Bill made a point. Our candidate pool looks pretty dang good this year. But one thing that wasn't mentioned, Eric Cantor is one of only two of 230-something House Republicans who've lost a nomination. In every other case to date where our incumbent in the House sought renomination, he won renomination. So what do you learn from Eric's loss? then it is very much an anomaly, at least in 2014. That's what I learned about it, and I am very hopeful and hear good things about the fellow that beat him. But I think if you want to read into that the incumbent Republicans are being decimated by Tea Party people in the primary, no senators lost. 2 House members lost. One of them was Ralph Hall, God bless him, age 92. And well, I mean it. And look, I think the world of him. But he and Eric are the only two. Hopefully we're in for a big victory in 14. Whatever, please don't ever forget. Hey, Darrell. Hey, nice to see you, sir. Don't ever. I use my last sentence to say, do not ever forget the most important election to us is 2014. 2016 we can start dealing with after November. We got to win in 2014 to get the House and Senate so we can tie Obama down much, much, much more tightly than we can now. Thank you very much.
Okay, let's take some questions. Mary.
Governor, thanks for your remarks. What are those purity issues that you worry about? What could trip up the Republicans in the run-up to November?
Well, I just, I'm old, but I do have a little bit of a memory, and I can remember Todd Aiken and Richard Murdoch vividly. And I can tell you, we have a candidate in my state that the liberal media elite have already identified, if he wins our nomination, as the combination Aiken-Murdoch of 2014. I think because I can tell you, if you ask Scott Brown or others, they will tell you at the end of 2012, they were not defending a tax on themselves. They were defending, well, Scott Brown's just like Aiken and Murdoch. And that's the first thing that scares me that could happen. But I think if we stay with the quality candidates we've had so far, you're going to have an election about issues. And it's going to be about the economy, jobs. It's going to be about Obamacare. It's going to be about energy. And you're going to have a group of Republican governors running for re-election who can actually run on their records, who've got real records of accomplishment.
Jim.
Hey, thank you, Governor. So I noticed you have a little race going on down there in your state. And you've spoken a little bit today, even saw you quoted in a newspaper, local paper called the New York Times, but elsewhere,
That's not a local paper. We don't allow them to be brought into Mississippi.
Hey, wait a minute. So you must not be a Starbucks man. Anyway, you've mentioned the influence of outside groups on these state races. So can you elaborate a little bit on that? And what is your fear in terms of what these outside groups will mean for your party in these primaries going forward?
Well, look, there are several groups that are raising money from Republicans and spending that money to defeat Republicans in primaries. And in some cases to defeat very good incumbents who are very popular with incredibly unvetted challengers. The challenger in my state is a plaintiff's lawyer who says he's for tort reform, but who in 2012 asked a jury to violate the tort reform law explicitly, and then when the jury did, filed a motion, his law firm filed a motion to declare the tort reform law of 2004 unconstitutional. And he runs on, I'm for tort reform. And your newspaper, James, in an editorial last Saturday about the muddle in Mississippi and the danger that this guy winning the nomination could cost us the Senate, said, but Club for Growth, one of his big sponsors, says he's doing better on tort reform. Well, last week, his law firm, in a case in which he filed as the lead counsel, asked the jury for $7 million in non-economic damages when the state tort reform law limits it to $1 million. So he must not have got the message last week, because 5 days before that was written, they asked for $7 million in non-economic damages. But look, we love for people to give money in our races. What we don't like is for the money to be controlled by political gunslingers with out-of-state organizations. People in my state, like the governor, the other senator, former Senator Lott, we're all for Thad Carter because we think it's best for Mississippi. These guys are all for his opponent because they think it's good for their political reputation nationally. So,
James Toronto, let me play devil's advocate here.
That's why they pay you the big bucks, James.
If I'm a very conservative Republican voter in Delaware in 2010 and I hear your pitch, I'm nodding along. I'm saying, yeah, Mike Castle, he can win. This challenger can't win. I'll vote for Castle even though I disagree with him on a lot of things. If I'm a very conservative Republican voter in Mississippi, a very conservative state, I'm going to say, well, wait a minute. Why should I vote? Why should I be satisfied with Thad Cochran in a state like Mississippi? And it seems like your argument is because the other guy might be bad for Scott Brown and other candidates in other states that are more difficult. It seems like that's a complicated argument to make. Am I missing some part of your argument?
Well, you're missing something that Harry Reid heard, because he said last week in an event at Senator McConnell's opponent's fundraiser, so it's a Kentucky Democrat Senate event, we're all pulling for Chris McDaniel, who is the challenger in Mississippi. Why are they all pulling for Chris McDaniel? A, because their polling shows he'd lose the Mississippi race. Okay, Obama got 44% in our state, and we got 40% hard Democrat. But secondly, for the reason I talked about, that they think he's going to be the Todd Aiken, Richard Murdoch of 2014. So I'm interested in, once they set the spending limits in the budget resolution, I want my senators, not Obama's political appointees, determining how money gets spent in Mississippi. We've always been that way, and I'm always going to be that way. I guess that's part of being governor, that you want as much state control of the money that comes back, rather than particularly for Obama's political appointees to be controlled.
Mary Kissel. Before cancer lost, immigration reform was gaining steam in the House. Should Boehner push forward with it?
I don't think Eric's law should have anything to do with it. What is going to be a huge concern is all these children. I mean, what we got now is about the worst thing you could have. I mean, I can't imagine anything worse than the status quo in terms of immigration policy. Now, and I don't know every detail, but the appearance is that the administration is letting thousands of children come into the country and almost putting them under the old Cuban rule, where we would let people fleeing Castro come and stay. Well, look, we promised the American people in 1986 that we control the border. If Alan Simpson was standing here, he was the named sponsor of the bill, he'd say, number one promise was we'll control the border, and we never did it. Republican administration or Democrat administration, that's not partisan. We never did it. So what the American people got a right to expect is not a promise that we're going to control the border. They deserve to have a system set up that measures and demonstrates that we've controlled the border. Right now, they're getting well, that's what the American people deserve. I will tell you this, Mary. I think the House can pass a conservative package, considerably to the right of what the Senate did, but can pass a conservative package that 80% of Republicans would approve. If it made everybody who's here illegally come in and confess that they're here illegally, to be put on probation, to pay a fine, to pay their back taxes, to be held to standards for years. You know, one thing about the Senate bill, nobody could change nobody could get a green card for 10 years. That's pretty long. But we could pass a very strong bill, but we got to control the border at the end of the day. If we don't, the American people have a right to be furious with us. My time up?
Your time is up, and if we can do a very quick question from the audience, and a quick answer. One quick one from the audience, one quick answer.
Yeah, it's usually not the questions that are a problem in it, okay. Mallory.
Governor, good evening. Chris Canarelli from the state of New Jersey Young Republican Federation. Does a 1994 contract with America that Newt Gingrich did, is that relevant in 2014? Does it work? Why or why not?
Could be. You know, when we did that in 1994, many people were super critical of us, because normally in the midterm election, it's about what's wrong with the incumbents. And a lot of people thought when we did Contract with America, we were going to take people's eye off all the things they were mad at Clinton about. Hillary Care, the largest tax increase in American history, gun control, midnight basketball, all that stuff. But it didn't, because we did it the right way. In 2016, unquestionably, we have to have an agenda to get for people to vote for. There's 100% necessity in a presidential year. This year, I'm not sure it's totally necessary, but I suspect it's good policy if you can get something agreed to that broadly wins the support of the party. If it has to be the most right-wing thing I can dream of, it has to be in there or I won't vote for it, then you won't have one. Thank you, Mallory.
Governor Haley Barbour.
I'm not going to go into the detail about what happened with our next speaker, but we had some miscommunications, and when I spoke to his office and I said you all were expecting to see him, he said we will change our schedule and do whatever it takes to get here to address you. He's the chairman of the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee. He's known as the member of Congress who gets to the bottom of important matters. His committee has been investigating Benghazi and the IRS scandals, and he's going to brief us today on what he's going to be doing in the next several weeks. It gives me a great deal of pleasure to introduce a man that I admire greatly and a man who would not disappoint you, and I thank you for that. Congressman Darrell Issa, come on up.
Thanks, Mallory. Now, Matthew, my timer's running, so please, no applause. Matthew, I'm going to steal the name Open the Books. You may see it a lot more. I already have an Open Gov Foundation working hard. By the way, it only took us 2 years to get nonprofit status on that. It was amazing how many questions they had about, you want to put proposed laws online and let the public, I did this before. And let the public have access to, there must be shorter people up here. Haley, how'd you do that? But, and let the public have access to laws before they're passed. Imagine this, you get to read it before you vote on it. And better than that, the American people get to vote on it before the elected officials do. So I'm going to find a way to use your name. Mary, you asked a wonderful question. The premise is just dead wrong. Immigration was going backwards, not forwards. We had already put out a statement of values, and we'd already put out the fact the president can't be trusted after what he's done and is doing. So, as the governor said, there's no question. We want to have immigration reform, and Republicans can pass one. But right now, we can't pass one that depends on the trust that the president will execute faithfully the laws. And that is more of a problem to doing reform than anything else. We almost have to say, you know what, we'll pass a law and it takes effect after you leave. Now, having said that, because I opened up on immigration, and it wasn't what you expected, but I serve on that committee and have authored immigration reform in the past and in this Congress, we have a high-tech bill, a bill that deals with doctors and with scientists, with people with advanced degrees in math and science, a bill that the liberal writer, Thomas Friedman, said very accurately, hey, Governor, this must be Governor's night, and what am I doing here? Hey, Rick. That's all right. The first time I met Governor Perry, we were at a table in Israel, and he was having breakfast all by himself. It's the only place there weren't Texans around, so I got to him. But a bill that would encourage and allow people with those top skills, the best and the brightest from around the world, to remain here when they graduate or come here, it scores $100 billion to the U.S. Treasury, the way the CBO scores. $100 billion. That's to the Treasury. It's 10 times that to the economy. Not a single Democrat voted for it in committee, and not a single Democrat can come up with a pairing. In other words, things that they want that they would agree to merge, because all they want is comprehensive, which, Mary, that means they want it their way or the highway. So I will disagree with your premise, not because you shouldn't be right, but because Eric
was hoping that things would change, and they haven't changed. Now, Mallory said that I had a very short period of time, which I've run through, in order to tell you what I'm working on. What I'm working on is transparency in government. Now, I know you're all laughing. This should be easy. We passed the Data Act. We're working on, which allows us to search better data if we're given it. We passed out of our committee something called FATARA, which would be to reform the IT system so that the systems produced by government for government might actually work, unlike healthcare.gov. I know that's not funny either. And we're working now on a major piece of reform on the Freedom of Information Act. Now, you might remember that. That's the act where a judge ordered the information so we'd know about the White House's activities in Benghazi when, in fact, they had ignored our subpoenas. So we're working on transparency, but the reality is we may get more through the courts than we ever get through the constitutional oversight that we're doing. And it is a major problem. There's a piece of legislation that was passed out of the House that will go nowhere in the Senate until we take the Senate. And it's called a standing bill. Came out of Judiciary. Very simply, it says that if the president or his underlings, cabinet officers and so on, do not faithfully execute on the Constitution or a statute, Congress, by a vote of the entire body of the House or the entire body of the Senate, can go to a federal judge and make a case that they're not doing it. The same thing the EPA does every time and other agencies do every time you try to do anything in America. These are some of the Haley knows about Fish and Wildlife because they're always there stopping everything. You know, it's in California it's gotten so good that we actually are stopping a fish that's not endangered because later on that fish may be eaten by somebody who's endangered. And of course, as a Republican from California, we are an endangered species. Now, since I know there's going to be questions, I'm going to open up with what you're all going to ask about. Yes, we know they're not telling the truth about losing Lois Lerner's emails. So almost exactly 7 days from this very minute, at 7 o'clock next Monday, we'll have the commissioner and perhaps two of the former commissioners of the IRS there to simply ask a very basic question. You may have heard, Haley and I are old enough that we heard it when it was said the first time, and that is, you know, to the commissioners about these lost emails. When did you know, and why didn't you tell us? Thank you.
Jim, first question.
Mary's already got her answers. I don't know if there'll be a follow-up question.
You'll come up with something.
Yeah,
thank you for coming. Welcome to New York City. Home
of the New York Times.
Home of the New York Times and the great Wall Street Journal as well. Hey, now come on.
Now I want you to know something. Ask your question, and I'll tell you the Haley Barbour story.
Okay. So based on what you know and suspect, who do you think, who is the senior most official who was involved in the IRS scandal?
Lois Lerner.
That's as high as it goes.
Our evidence shows her actions. Now, did she speak with the commissioners? Did she email to the commissioners? Did she have access? Did she forward documents, cause to be forward documents, 1.1 million documents to the Department of Justice in order to encourage them to go after nonprofits? Yes. But when you're talking about sort of highest, we've always said we follow the facts. The facts lead to her, and she took the fifth. Now, the New York Times reminds me of when Haley Barbour first told me about lawyers. He's from Mississippi. So he said, down in Mississippi, these liars. And he kept saying liars. And it took me a while to realize he was talking about lawyers. I just want you to know, Haley and I go back a ways. We go back to when I used to give money as a donor. And Haley encouraged me to run, which was the only way to get out of giving money as a donor.
Next question from Mr. Toronto.
Congressman, a quick two-parter about the IRS scandal.
Only one part.
All right.
You could have a two-part question. I'm going to have a one-part answer, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, they're very closely related. cliche of Washington scandals going back to Watergate is the cover-up is worse than the crime. Is that true in this case? And if federal data collection is as bad as you say, as it's requiring all of this reform legislation,
then why
is it possible that the IRS is telling the truth and this is a case of incompetence?
Well, those aren't that close. The clear question is why are members of Congress in vast amounts and the White House trying to cover up for Lois Lerner if she's the only person? I have no idea. The only reason I think it goes beyond Lois Lerner is, in fact, that they're spending so much time trying to protect her. It's that simple. And I never fail to assume the highest level of incompetence within my government. The problem is that in the ordinary course of how Microsoft Exchange, the system they're using, works, it's a server-based system, so a crash of an individual computer doesn't change that. And if the IRS chose to have someone covered under the Federal Records Act maintaining on an individual PC, then it's not only completely circumventing the way Microsoft Exchange works, but it's also, I'm a geek, I can't help it, Mary, but it also, you not only have to distort it, but then you'd have to distort it and not do backups. So you can assume that, the same as I could assume that Eric Lichtblau made 17 factual errors when he did the hit piece on me, and it was just an accident, that he actually thought he could see the country club from my office that overlooks the freeway. It could happen. He could be that inept.
I stand by my colleague.
Mary.
You remember what I said about how they pronounce lawyers in Mississippi? Eric Lichtblau.
Mary.
Thank you, Congressman. So I know you're about truth and transparency and data.
And about facts. Defining small regional publications.
Right. So let's talk about some data and some facts.
You fired her. You just have one more to get rid of, Eric.
He's a good sport. Majority of Americans.
Yeah, I was a good sport when he did the hit piece on the LA Times in my Senate race. But you know, when lightning strikes twice, you start wondering what God really has against you. Go ahead, Mary. Take all the time you want.
Since you asked me to ask this question, majority of Americans support immigration reform. More than 2/3 of Republicans support it. Multiple polls. Doug Holtz-Egan last week did a poll, and he went through all of the Gang of Six, proposals, and then he asked primary GOP voters, would you vote for a politician who voted for this? Overwhelming majority said yes. Is there a chance that the GOP is being cowed and responding to a very, very vocal minority that does not actually help the party or represent the views of the vast majority, not just of the party, but of Americans?
No, it's a great question and well asked, and I'll answer it because, in fact, I authored legislation. I worked with Howard Berman. We did the Ag Jobs bill that never became law, including while Democrats were in charge, and I have a current piece of legislation that allows us to retain the best and the brightest that I can't get even one Democratic vote on. So I feel those voters' pains, and I think my voters do support that, as they support the principle of dealing fairly. But the answer to your question is no. Next.
Jim.
Okay. All right, let's move on from a colleague who I very
I'm
much...
doing this whole thing for Rick and Haley. You understand.
But very much respect my colleague. So, but
Haley, just remember, he talked well of you as a running mate. Just remember that.
I wrote this quote coming in here, but Hillary Clinton did a nationally televised interview where she was asked about Benghazi, and the quote isn't that direct, but she seems to imply that the Benghazi investigation is quote unquote minor league ball, and she goes
not to the families.
She goes on to say. She goes on to speak about her own involvement. She says she takes responsibility. You may have seen these quotes, but that she's not an expert in security and the details of the building itself. Are you satisfied that you've learned everything you wanted to learn from former Secretary of State Clinton?
No. Oh, you have a follow-up?
Well, so what more would you like to learn, and how do you intend to go about doing so?
Well, first of all, Chairman Trey Gowdy now has a select committee that brings together 5 committees.
From South Carolina.
From South Carolina. And Trey, I take a lot of credit for Trey. Granted, he was an assistant U.S. attorney, a district attorney, and came as a career professional and knew what he needed to know. But when he beat a Republican in a primary, an incumbent Republican, I recruited him for my committee. And he is an amazing, amazing talent. He and Jim Jordan are on that committee from my committee. They're, two of their first 3 employees come from my committee, and more will from my staff. We will do a thorough investigation. We will get to the bottom of the cover-up. We already have gotten to the facts, which are, before this happened, the ambassador and a number of other security people were begging for just to keep the security they had, plus they'd like to have had more. Even after their bomb was blown, even after a bomb blew out the wall of the Benghazi facility, and even after there were 2 attempts to kill the British ambassador, and the British and all other Western flags pulled out of Benghazi, they were left there with a reduced security force. Then during those 8.5 hours that they were fighting for their lives, not a single DoD asset was allowed to head toward Benghazi from anywhere in the world. And then they didn't just lie in the confusion of the first few hours. Hillary Rodham Clinton and others, the president, the vice president, they went to Dover Air Force Base and they told the family they were going to get that guy for the video. We have more to learn.
One quick question from the audience. I'm going to come down here.
It's always good to be in the cheap seats in the back. They call on you.
Please stand up.
Just remember, that question's standing between you and Rick Perry. Or the rest of everyone.
Sir, when you look at these old crime commission hearings from the 50s and 60s, they kept these guys, the whitest guys in the chair, when they took the fifth for an extended period of time. You had Lois Lerner in front of you, and you let her waltz in and out like she was the Queen of England. What was the rationale?
The American Bar Association, I'm not a lawyer or a liar. And the American Bar Association has made it very clear that when you have a witness who takes the fifth, you can follow up with appropriate questions to ensure that that witness will not answer any questions. The fact is that we did that twice. Once, the first time when she took the fifth, well, first she said things, then she took the fifth, then she answered some questions, then she took the fifth again, and then we dismissed her. I asked her 11 questions. And I became thoroughly convinced that in spite of her attorney's claim the weekend before, that in writing, in emails, in writing, that she was going to come and she was going to testify, she clearly wasn't. At that point, I had an obligation on behalf of lawyers, some of them members of the D.C. Bar, not to abuse a witness as much as I would have liked to. Thank you.
Chairman Darrell Issa, we hope to have him back next year again.
Absolutely. Sorry it didn't work out as well.
And I'd like to give a shout out to Kurt Bardella, who actually arranged this whole thing. Okay. There's a number of people that I'd like to thank, but the person I have to thank most for the success of this meeting is my partner, wherever he is, Obie Murray. Edward O'Brien Murray, where are you, Obie? And normally doing something important in the back. Our panelists, what a group of panelists. James Taranto, Wall Street Journal's editorial board and author of Best of the Web. Mary Kissel, member of the Wall Street Journal's editorial board and host of Opinion Journal on Wall Street Journal Live. Make sure you see it, it's fabulous. And Jim Rutenberg, New York Times Magazine chief political correspondent. Thank you for doing such an amazing job.
Also want to thank the organizations carrying this. I think there's 19 organizations carrying this around the world, literally, and I hope I hope all of them are enjoying hearing these comments tonight. Okay. Our final speaker is a fifth-generation Texan. He serves as Texas's 47th governor. During his tenure, Texas' economy thrived thanks to a focused effort to keep taxes low, regulations predictable, and the legal system fair. Governor Perry is frequently mentioned as a potential candidate for president in 2016. Tonight, Governor Perry will tell us that he has red state solutions to blue state problems. Come on up, Governor Rick Perry.
Good to be with you. Thank you. James, Mary, Jim, thank you. You've got our Texas boy over there now working with you. So, yeah, it's good. He will straighten you boys right up. You think? He's good. It'll be fun. Yeah, he's a good guy. Thank you all for letting me come and to participate with you today. Haley, it's an honor to be with you, and Daryl, Marcia, who else was here? Billy Crystal was in the crowd, I think you already heard from. So I don't know how to add on to that. That's Roger Williams, former Secretary of State of the great state of Texas, and he can sell you a car. The man knows how to sell. How do you make America work again? I think of all the questions that are in front of us as a people. How do we make America work again? How do we get these millions of people who are either underemployed or not employed at all back working, back doing what they want to do, back taking care of their family, having the dignity of having a job? And I will suggest to you that the place that you look, the place that you focus is on the states, is at the state level. Asking those governors to compete against each other. When you think about the 10th Amendment, our founding fathers, it's not some faraway document that was put together hundreds of years ago. It's very much as alive today. It's as very much as powerful today as at any time in our country's history. States having the opportunity to compete against each other. Because competition, truly, when you get down to it, is how the strength of this country is exhibited. So what is the fastest way to get America working again? If I went around this room and asked that question, I would probably get a lot of different answers. But I will suggest to you the quickest, most powerful way to get America working again is to liberalize the energy policies in this country and to use the energy resources that we have in this country. Open up the XL pipeline, open up these federal lands for the development of energy resources that we have in our country. And you don't have to look much further than the states to see the difference in that strategy when you look across this country. This is a bit fresh on my mind as Bobby Jindal and Matt Mead and Jack Dalrymple and myself just met with a group of people in Houston, Texas today to talk about energy and energy policy in this country or the lack thereof. And when you think about what's occurred in those states, I think right at 50% of all the energy produced in America are in those 4 states. You know, Louisiana and North Dakota, Wyoming and Texas. And the jobs that have been created. Now, one of the fallacies that people make when they talk about what's happening in the state of Texas, 37% since 2000, 37% of all the new private sector jobs created in America were created in Texas. 37%. That is now think about that a second. 1 out of 12 Americans lives in the state of Texas. But 3 out of 8 of the jobs created in that 13-plus year period of time was in that state. You have to ask yourself, why is that the case? Why did the state of Texas have such an impact on this country? And I will suggest to you that it gets down to the policies that were put in place. There's been an experiment going on in this country over the course of the last 13, 14 years. We've had continuity of philosophy. We've had continuity of leadership in the state of Texas. People who understand that if you'll put tax policy into place that addresses the needs of the people as they've asked for them through their elected officials, you have as light a burden from a tax impact as you can, a regulatory climate that is fair and predictable, a legal system, Darrell, that doesn't allow for oversuing, and you have accountable public schools, which in turn develops the skilled workforce of which businesses are going to desire and need. Those are the four pillars, if you will, that hold up an economy, that will ignite the job creators, give people the confidence that there is going to be stability and predictability in an economic climate. And the government fairly well needs to get out of the way of those job creators and allow them to do what they're very good at, which is create those jobs. And that's what's occurred in the state of Texas. I'll suggest to you that's what's happening in the states that, Mary, we refer to as the red states. Those states like Mississippi that Haley led rather admirably for some years. But that is the key to the future of this country, I will suggest to you. I've said on a number of occasions that I would like to make Washington as inconsequential in our lives as we can. And what I mean by that, is that allow the states to be where education policies put into place, where the policies that really matter to the people in your states are being decided. And you know, whatever those policies may be, Washington cannot put policies into place that will cover such a diverse and expansive country as America. Allow the states to be where those decisions are made. This country will be more economically powerful, and I will suggest to you at the end of the day, happier.
James Toronto. Governor, I don't think I do you an injustice when I observe that of all of the 2012 presidential campaigns, yours was the one that fell shortest of expectations. What went wrong?
Well, it was an incredibly exciting period of time. If you recall, I led in the polls in, I'm going to say, late August, and it was 3 of the most exhilarating hours of my life. It's pretty powerful stuff for a boy from Paint Creek. But in all seriousness, some extraordinary lessons, hard lessons, frustrating lessons that I learned during that period of time. The least of which is not, if you're going to run for the presidency of the United States, I highly suggest you don't have major back surgery 6 weeks before you bail into the race. And the second one is preparation. I cannot overstate how important preparation is in running for the presidency of the United States. When you look back over the course of the history of the Republican Party, and the nomination process, going all the way back to Dwight David Eisenhower. Every individual that we nominated as Republican has done this more than once, with the exception of George W. And you got to have a little asterisk by his name from the standpoint of he may have had a little more experience than the average Joe on presidential elections because of his father's work and him involved with those. So preparation is so important, and I wasn't prepared. And I readily admit now, with hindsight, that I was not prepared, not even close, I will suggest to you. So don't have that back surgery, James, if you're thinking about doing that, and prepare, prepare, and prepare.
Mary Kissel.
Governor, you didn't mention any social issues. It's a pure economic message when you come here to New York and as you tour the country. Are you not talking about those issues? Is that not
Actually, it was a pure economic message in San Francisco until a question from the audience, because the fact is that's where this country's got to get focused. I mean, I make the statement on a regular basis that even those social issues that tear us apart as a country need to be decided in the states, not decided one size fits all in Washington, D.C. Allow the states to decide those. And then people will figure out where they want to live. We're an incredibly mobile society today. And if you want to live in a state that has a particular position relative to economic issues, relative to social issues, I'm pretty sure in those 50 laboratories of innovation out there, we will find those places, or you will find those places that you're comfortable with. But we really have to not be distracted by all of the different things that people would like to distract us on. If we really want to get this country back on track, if we really want to get America back working again, we best stay focused on jobs and economic development and how we create an environment in this country to make America great again.
Jim. Governor, welcome to New York City. So speaking of the issue that we've now brought up, the comments in San Francisco comparing gay, I guess it's the gay or homosexuality to alcoholism. Governor Chris Christie stood up and said this isn't how we should be talking about it. How, first of all, do you think those remarks kind of took over your message? And secondarily, how should your party handle the issue of gay marriage and gay issues now that the culture seems to be shifting so much?
Well, let me just speak from the standpoint of Texas, and Texas has made the decision about that some 5 or 6 years ago. We had a constitutional amendment election, which, by the way, I think, as I said in my early remarks, that's where this needs to be decided, is at the state level. And in Texas, they made that decision, and that overwhelmingly they made the decision that marriage is between one man and one woman. And again, so we've sat here, and 2 out of the 3 questions have been on this issue. And again, I will suggest to you that the Republican Party, you know, we have our positions on that, and I think what we all need to understand is we're incredibly tolerant of all people. But the fact is, what does Americans really care about? And it's getting this country back working again. It's the millions of people that are on the sidelines that are underemployed or unemployed. And if we don't get focused on that, if we allow ourselves to be distracted by all of these other side issues, frankly, then this country is not going to get to where it needs to be. And if we're going to be powerful from the standpoint of being able to have a foreign policy that matters, we have to have an economic basis of which that has to stand. If we don't have a strong job creation basis in this country, America is going to be less. And we cannot be distracted. It's like a bombing mission, if you will. And here's your target. And you need to stay on that target. And if the Republican Party is going to lead this country, it has to be the party of big ideas. It has to be the party that lays out substantial vision for the future of this country. And it must be inextricably intertwined to getting this country working again and creating a climate where those individuals who are job creators know that they can risk their capital and have a chance to have a return on their investments. And the states are where those decisions are best going to be made.
James Toronto. And then we'll go to the audience. Well, I'll make it 3 out of 4. If you can't escape these questions on a relatively friendly panel like this one, how is a presidential candidate going to escape them or avoid being distracted by them, to use your terms, in a debate with 3 mainstream media journalists questioning you and the Democratic, or him and the Democratic nominee?
But I think that's, we have to go back to and to talk about what is important to the vast majority of the people of this country. And I will suggest to you that is how, I mean, the President of the United States stood up in front of a group of college kids this weekend and told them that they needed to help him on this issue of climate change. And if you are a skeptic about that, you are a denier. And what he needs to be asking those kids is, what do you think we're going to do to make sure you have a job in the future? And if his EPA regulations go into place, it's going to be a job killer in this country. And governors all across this country need to stand up and be saying that, as a number of us did today, that those EPA regulations are killers. And to be distracted by whatever issue that's out there. and to take us away from a mainstream message about getting Americans back working again. If we don't keep on that message, then we will not be successful. We won't be successful as a party, and we won't be successful as a country.
Let's take some questions from here.
Thank you. Can we truly solve the jobs issue if we don't oppose amnesty? And I ask you specifically because, given the president of Mexico praised you previously for supporting amnesty, how can we truly rebuild the economy if we don't oppose illegal immigration?
Hang on just a second, but don't take that away from him, because I really don't understand what he just said. Did you make the statement that the president of Mexico praised me for being for amnesty?
President Vicente Fox.
Yeah, well, I'm sorry. I've never been for amnesty. We have a process in this country of which, if you want to become a citizen of this country, that the line is there and you can get in it and process it. The bigger issue that we have to deal with is how are we going to, as a country, address what is going on in our southern border. As the governor of the state that shares that border and has been the governor for the last 13 plus years, I have talked over and over again about how we secure that border. And I don't think Americans are going to trust Washington to ever address the issue of immigration until you secure the border. We know how to secure the border. You put the boots on the ground, you have the strategic fencing in place, the aviation assets and the other technological assets that you have, and you can secure the border with Mexico. And until you do that, you cannot even have, I mean, you can have the conversation, but you are just having a conversation. You're not dealing with the issue that has to be addressed in this country, and that is secure the border first, then we can have this conversation.
We have about 30 seconds left. So I'm going to take a host's prerogative and ask you the big question. Are you running for president?
I'm preparing.
We'll see you all in September. Have a great summer.
Oh, shoot. And I was supposed to tell the kids, and I forgot.